It is the third model introduced in the 2023 Shaman King collaboration with Meteorot. Sporting Fists of Ice and a Will of Steel, it is SKG02 Horoke Wolf. With a kit of Minus Guard, Hyper Freeze, Break Rush, Wheeled Legs, and the leg ability of Snow type, which grants S rank on snowy terrain in addition to the leg standard matches. Now, as it was with Byakuyo and the Raite, Horoke Wolf essentially picks up where we left off with another even more powerful, but not absurdly broken either, collaboration model with some very powerful skills under its belt that can be put to good use. Whether it be as a pure set or as mixed parts, these Fists of Ice are most certainly going to be a lot harder than meets the eye, and most certainly will be the enemy shattering and not it itself. Minus Guard on the head part is a defense-based skill that is a rather unique take on how to intercept blows from opponents. Now, in the past, when enemies tried to use a status ailment of any kind, Deathlock, Bug, Virus, Melt, whatever it is, if it's not something like Perfect Guard or Specific Guard to nullify it, the ailment itself will be touched on the defender and relatively have a high chance of rendering it completely nil. Minus Guard, on the other hand, doesn't work that way. Similar to Needle Guard, which only has one charge, Minus Guard works the very same. But instead of reflecting damage at the opponent, it instead reflects the ailment back at the opponent. So if you go to attack Horoke Wolf with, say, Deathlock or Freeze as an example, if he intercepts your blow while in defensive stance, guess what? It's not going to be him that's going to be up no dodge, no defend. It's going to be you that's slapped with no dodge, no defend instead. So definitely exercise a lot of caution if you are fighting him on the enemy side and you do make use of interruption or ailments to try to keep your team at an advantage. Of course, the other big catch to it as well is that because it is a standard defense-based part, as worth mentioning, it does mean it is also susceptible to anyone that is using Destroy as a one-shot. Very similarly in this sense as it will be for Byakuyo, some caution will be advised if you are going to use Minus Guard at any point on the field, but still worth using as a deterrent to anyone that tries to use ailments to get an edge on you. Hyper Freeze on the right arm, and kind of expected with a ice-based model like this to have at least one type of freeze part, Hyper Freeze is most certainly no exception to this. Basically, it will stop the opponent cold if you do manage to land a successful attack on them, rendering them unable to dodge or defend, and as long as they stay frozen, the next hit is guaranteed to land and guaranteed crit on top of that. Now, with it being Hyper Freeze, it does also mean it's going to hit notably harder, and it does also pack pierce damage, which Standard Freeze or Freeze Shot does not. However, it is also worth noting that Hyper Freeze does also slap Horoke Wolf with a no dodge and no defend penalty while he is in cooldown. So caution is advised if you are going to make use of that. And if the enemy is using Stat Cleanse or something similar, that is going to put him at a relatively tough disadvantage because that is kind of one of the big reasons he's on the field to begin with. Break Rush on the left arm, on the other hand, is not a freeze-based skill, but something just as deadly and just as powerful all the same. Break Rush is a gravity attribute skill, using the weight of a frozen fist against the opponent and checks them for their weight when attacking them. Now, as it is with any other gravity-based skill, break, hammer, press, or anything similar, Break Rush will check the opponent for their weight, like I said. So if they are using 2 or more heavy parts, they are most certainly going to be packing on some extra punish damage on top of that. Where if they're only packing 1 or none, probably going to be a relatively minimal love tap more than anything else. The one thing that sets Break Rush apart, on the other hand, though, is the fact that it is an AoE type of attack. So instead of it being pierce like Break or Break Hammer will be, it instead will spread its damage across all parts. Now, this does mean that Break Rush will have a little bit of a harder time breaking things compared to Break or even a Break Hammer, which has dedicated pierce damage for that. But this does make it a lot easier that if Horoke Wolf doesn't finish you, something behind him absolutely will, because he eats a really heavy chunk of HP if you are attacking someone with triple heavy or even 2 heavy parts at that. Wheeled Legs means that he's going to have very solid high base mobility, which is kind of par for the course for Wheeled Legs, at the cost that he is going to be very fickle when it comes to terrain compatibility. As with the inclusion of Cyber, which pretty much everyone gets S rank on, he's only going to have like 2 terrains at best that wheeled legs are going to be really good on, which already will kind of hurt his overall viability on the field. But that is where snow type comes into play. Normally, snowy terrain is the one that's going to screw up everybody, because even float or sea legs, which get A rank at best, well, float's going to get A rank at best on everything anyway, minus cyber, it's going to be a very difficult terrain to match on while having any kind of tactical advantage, where most legs will have either B or C rank, or even in some cases D at the worst. It's going to be a very difficult terrain to balance on. So having a leg that's already really fast, but giving it a leg ability that grants it S rank on this very nasty terrain means that you're going to have a speed advantage and the combat advantage maintained as long as you have that, because while everyone else is trying to pull their legs out of the snow, you're basically going to be skating circles around them the entire time. Now when it comes to specs as well, he is relatively tanky across the board too, which is very nice and kind of to be expected for being a double heavy with rather heavy looking ice fist there. A head HP of about 3,900 HP, just shy of 4k there. Arms about 3,750 each, and the legs at 4,350 also is a very healthy HP pool, so he can most certainly hold his own decently well without getting crippled too quickly. Leg stats are also really nice too. A base mobility of 921 is really nice and par for the course for wheeled legs. High base mobility is already off to a good start, and snow type is only going to make that even better. An evade of 1134 is really nice, as it will mean he'll have a relatively decent time dodging or grazing incoming attacks. A melee resist of just close to 1450 there is exceptionally nice, as it means he can tank blows up close and personal very, very well without it ever having to come back and cripple or break him too quickly. And a shoot resist of 982, just barely 1,000 there as well at base stats, is not too terrible, honestly. Now, it does mean that he is going to take slightly more damage from shooting attacks than he will melee, but being just shy of 1,000 there is still kind of at the bottom end of the cusp mark of where you really want to be at for your base stats, so that you can keep a pretty well-rounded stat coverage once your bot officially hits the field and gets the terrain bonus. All this being said, though, as a pure set score, I still do have to rate Horoke Wolf a pretty middle-of-the-road 5 out of 10. Not to say that his kit is bad, but it's very janky. Minus Guard alone as a defense skill is nice to have, but you really won't be seeing enemies use a lot of ailments these days, with the exception of Tornado, maybe Flash or something at that point. But you have to be exceptionally fast if you want to be able to make use of that on the field. Plus, because it is a defense skill, anyone that is using Destroy, while he may be immune to Deathlock or something similar, Destroy will still one-shot him because it is a defense skill that is non-meta change on a head part. Hyper Freeze as well is nice, but the no dodge, no defend penalty is something to keep in mind while on your cooldown, and anyone that is making use of Stat Cleanse does render him kinda null and void in this instance, while he is making use of that. And Break Rush is also nice to have, but again, it does require the enemy to be using 2 or more heavy parts to capitalize on that damage bonus, and because it is an AoE, he will not be breaking things relatively quick. Wheeled legs, again, normally a very fickle leg, but for the most part, it still will be, with the exception of the snow type ability, which will help it, but in terms of literally any other terrain that you'll be fighting on, it's just going to be kind of a passive that sits there and does nothing. Now, as mixed parts, on the other hand, I do have to rate him considerably higher at an 8 out of 10. Now, while Minus Guard, Hyper Freeze, and Break Rush are still really good parts to make use of, despite both arms being heavy, Wheeled Legs, 2 heavy slots, and Snow type ability on that probably is going to make that one single part on him the absolute MVP, and probably 80% of the reason I would encourage pulling for Horoke Wolf, because on weeks that we have Snow type terrain as a meta league, or just anywhere else that it will be seen as a necessity and requirement, these legs will absolutely come to your aid, making sure that you maintain the power and the speed advantage over any other opponent that would struggle on the very messy terrain.